When my uncle destroyed my parents' business, I was 19 years old. I didn't say anything. I didn't post anything. I didn't make a single phone call. I just got to work. 15 years later, on a Thursday afternoon in late October, with the light coming through the window the way it only comes through in late October, my phone vibrated on my desk, and his name appeared on the screen for the first time since I was a teenager. He was calling to ask for a favor. I want to tell you what happened, not because I'm proud of it. I'm not sure proud is the right word for any of this. I want to tell you because I think there's a version of this story almost everyone has lived through in some shape, and almost no one talks about it the way it really happened. The way it really happens isn't loud. It isn't a screaming match at a dinner table. It isn't a viral post. It's quieter than that. And it takes longer than anyone wants it to. I'm going to tell you about my Uncle Conrad. I'm going to tell you about my father, Elliot, who I loved more than I knew how to say while he was alive. I'm going to tell you about a small lumber and millwork company in a town called Linden, Pennsylvania, that my parents built with their hands over 22 years. And I'm going to tell you about a green pencil ledger I now keep in the top drawer of my desk, and why I haven't worn my father's jacket in 15 years, and what happened the day I finally did. But first I want to tell you about a Sunday in August when I was 17, because if you don't understand that Sunday, none of the rest of it will make sense. We were at my grandmother's house, the whole family. My father grilled in a quiet, methodical way. He was the kind of man who flipped a piece of chicken once and only once, and if you suggested doing it differently, he'd just smile and say, that's interesting. My mother, Adele, was inside laughing too hard at one of Lorraine's stories about a neighbor's dog. Lorraine was my aunt, Conrad's wife. She laughed with her whole upper body. It was one of the first things people noticed about her, and Conrad. Conrad stood by the grill with a beer in one hand and his other hand on my father's shoulder, and he was telling a story about the two of them as kids. About how my dad once stayed up all night fixing a bicycle Conrad had broken, and how my dad refused to let Conrad take the blame when their father came down the next morning. Conrad told the story with this softness in his voice. He said, "That's Elliot. That's my brother. He's the better man. He's always been the better man." I remember standing at the screen door watching that. I remember the smell of the lighter fluid and the sound of cicadas, and the way my father didn't say anything back. He just kept turning the chicken. And I remember thinking, in the simple, unguarded way, you can only think when you're 17 and you haven't been hurt yet by the people you love, that I came from something good, that I was lucky. I don't tell you about that Sunday to make you sad. I tell you about it because I need you to understand, before I tell you anything else, that I did not grow up with a villain. I grew up with an uncle who put his hand on my father's shoulder and meant it, or seemed to mean it. Or, and this is the part I still can't fully untangle, meant it in some genuine human way that did not stop him 2 years later from doing what he did. My parents' business was called Vance Lumber and Millwork. It started in 1996 as a single warehouse on the edge of Linden, off a county road that nobody used unless they had a reason. My father did the work. My mother did the books. For the first 6 years, they didn't take a vacation. They didn't take a weekend. My mother kept a small green pencil ledger, not for the business. The business had its own real books, but a personal one for herself. She wrote in pencil because, as she once told me, pencil means you can be wrong. Pen means you've decided. She made entries every Sunday night at the kitchen table. Hours worked, money saved. Small wins, small losses, the names of customers who paid late, the names of customers who paid on time and thanked her. She kept that ledger for 22 years. By the time I was a teenager, the business was real. It employed 11 people. It supplied custom millwork to contractors across 3 counties. It had a reputation. People in Linden knew the name Vance, and the name meant something specific. It meant the wood would be the right wood. It meant the invoice would be the right invoice. It meant Elliot would shake your hand and look you in the eye. Conrad came in as a partner in 2014. I was 16. He had spent the previous decade in commercial real estate 2 states over, and something had gone wrong with that. I never got the full story. None of us did, and he came home to Linden looking for, in his words, a new chapter. My father loved him. That is the thing I have to keep saying, even now, because if I don't say it, the rest doesn't make sense. My father loved his younger brother. My father wanted his younger brother to have a place at the table. So Conrad came in as a partner, not an employee. A partner. The papers were drawn up at the lawyer's office in town. My father read them carefully. My mother read them more carefully. Conrad signed them with a kind of theatrical flourish and then took us all to dinner. At dinner, he raised his glass and he said the thing he always said, the thing that became the unofficial slogan of every family event after that. He said, "We're family. That's the only contract that matters." My mother lowered her glass a half second after everyone else. I noticed because I was sitting next to her. I didn't ask her why. I wish I had. For 2 years, things were fine, maybe even good. Conrad had a way with the bigger contractors that my father didn't have. He could small talk a man into a larger order. He could turn a quote into a conversation. He could remember the names of children he'd never met. The business grew. The numbers in my mother's green pencil ledger grew. We took a vacation, the first real one, to a cabin in the Poconos. My mother sat on the porch in the morning and laughed at nothing, and my father, in the chair next to her, said, "What?" And she said, "It's nice." And he said, "Yeah, it's nice." I'm telling you all of this because I need you to feel what was there before any of it was taken. I need you to understand that what got broken was not just a business. It was a Sunday porch. It was a sentence said in a cabin. It was a green pencil ledger written in by a woman who'd worked 22 years for something that, on a Tuesday in March of my 19th year, stopped being hers in the way she thought it was hers. I want to tell you what happened on that Tuesday. Word for word, the way I remember it. Because some words you don't forget. I was home from college for spring break. I'd come back to surprise my parents. I hadn't told them I was coming. I drove in late Monday night and slept in my old room and woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of my mother in the kitchen. Not cooking, just standing. She was holding a piece of paper. She was holding it the way you hold something that has just told you something terrible. The paper was from a lawyer. The lawyer represented Conrad. The letter stated, in the careful neutral changes those letters always use, that Conrad was exercising a clause in the partnership agreement, a clause my parents had not understood the way Conrad had understood it, that allowed him, under certain financial conditions which had been quietly engineered over the preceding 8 months, to assume majority control of Vance Lumber and Millwork. The letter further stated that, effective immediately, my parents' operational authority over the company was suspended pending review. My mother said, "I don't understand." My father, who had walked in from the porch holding a coffee cup, looked at the letter for a long time without taking it from her. Then he said, "I'll call him." He called Conrad. Conrad didn't answer. He called Conrad 3 more times that morning. Conrad didn't answer. At 2 in the afternoon, Conrad answered. I was in the room. My father had the phone on speaker, not because he wanted me to hear, but because his hands were shaking too much to hold it to his ear. I heard my uncle's voice come through that speaker. I heard him say, in a tone I had never heard him use before, not unkind but professional, the way you talk to a stranger across a desk, he said, "Elliot, I know this is hard, but this is what's best for the business. We need new leadership. You and Adele have done beautiful work. But you're tired. Everyone can see it. I'm going to take care of this. We're family. That's the only contract that matters." He said that sentence, that exact sentence, and then he hung up. My father set the phone down on the kitchen counter. He sat down in his chair. He did not cry. He did not yell. He looked at my mother and he said, "Adele, I think we have a problem." My mother said, "What kind of problem?" He said, "The kind we're not going to fix today. I want you to imagine being 19 years old in that kitchen. I want you to imagine watching the 2 people who raised you, the 2 people who'd built something from nothing, who'd given you everything you had, who'd never asked you for anything, sit at a kitchen table and absorb a blow they did not know how to absorb. I want you to imagine the silence in that room. Because that silence is where this whole story actually starts. I drove back to college 3 days later. I shouldn't have. But my father insisted. He said, "Silas, go finish your semester. This is not your problem to solve." He was wrong. I want to be careful here. I loved him, and he was wrong about that one thing. Because it was, in a way he didn't realize, I was going to become my problem to solve. Just not in the way either of us would have predicted. The lawsuits dragged on for 19 months. I won't bore you with the legal mechanics, partly because they were boring even at the time, and partly because the law was never the real story. The real story was this. Conrad had moved slowly. He had moved patiently. He had spent 8 months before that letter doing things, quiet things, with vendors and with the bank and with a junior accountant my parents trusted. He had not done anything illegal. He had done something worse. He had done something perfectly within the rules. And he had done it to people who had assumed the rules didn't apply between brothers. My parents lost the business. Not all of it. They got a settlement, smaller than it should have been, but something. Conrad kept the name. Conrad kept the warehouse. Conrad kept the trucks with Vance, painted on the side in the same lettering my father had picked out in 1996. The trucks still drove down the county road I grew up watching them drive down. They still do. My father was 61 years old when this happened. He worked construction for the next 3 years, day labor, then jobs that were a little better, but never anything that was his. My mother went back to bookkeeping for a small dental practice in town. She kept the green pencil ledger. She stopped writing in it on Sunday nights. She wrote in it less and less. I'd visit and find it on the kitchen counter, open to a page with 3 or 4 entries on it and then a long blank space. My father died of a heart attack in the spring of my 23rd year. He's 65. He had been doing well, the doctor said. Then one morning, he wasn't. My mother called me at 6:14 in the morning. I remember the time because my phone had just changed from 6:13 to 6:14 when it rang. She said, "Silas, your father," and then she couldn't say anything else, so I said it for her. I said, I'm coming home. I drove the 4 hours back to Linden in a state I cannot describe to you. I want to tell you I was angry. I wasn't. And this is the part that surprised me, I was very, very calm. The kind of calm you don't trust. The kind of calm that's actually just shock with good posture. At the funeral, Conrad showed up. He wore a black suit. He brought Lorraine. He hugged my mother. My mother hugged him back. I watched it happen, and I did not move from where I was standing on the other side of the room. He came over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder the way he had put his hand on my father's shoulder at that grill 12 years before. He said, "Silas, I'm so sorry. He was the better man. He was always the better man." I looked at him. I want to tell you I said something powerful. I want to tell you I gave a speech. I didn't. I just looked at him. And then I said, "Thank you for coming, Uncle Conrad." And I walked away. I didn't speak to him again for 15 years. I want to tell you what I did instead. Because this is the part of the story that almost no one tells. And it's the part I think matters most. I went back to school. I finished my degree in operations management, a degree I had chosen, originally, for boring practical reasons and which now took on a meaning I had not anticipated. I read everything I could find about the way small businesses get taken apart from the inside. I read about partnership agreements. I read about minority shareholder protections. I read about the patterns, and there are patterns, by which a family business gets pulled apart by one patient bad actor with access to the books. I got a job out of college at a logistics firm in Pittsburgh. I was good at it. I was good at it in a way that surprised my employers and, honestly, surprised me. There's a thing that happens when grief gets repurposed into focus. I don't recommend it as a life strategy, but I won't pretend it didn't work. I had a mentor there. His name was Tomas Reyes. He was the chief operating officer, and he was, for reasons I never fully understood, kind to me in a way that I needed and could not have asked for. He had lost his own father young. He saw something in me that he recognized. One evening, in his office, after a long day, he said, "Silas, you work like a man trying to outrun something. You want to tell me what?" I told him. The whole thing. Conrad, the letter, the kitchen, the funeral. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You have a choice now. You can let that story make you small, or you can let it make you sharp. I can't tell you which to choose. But I can tell you that whichever you choose, you'll be living inside it for a long time." I chose sharp. I'm not sure that was the right choice. I'm telling you the truth. For the next decade, I worked. I worked the way people who don't have anything else to lose work. I left the logistics firm. I started my own consulting practice focused on operational race restructuring for mid-sized industrial companies. Exactly the kind of company my parents had run. I learned everything about how those companies survived. I learned everything about how they died. I built a reputation, slowly, in 3 states. I was 31 years old, and I had a list of clients I had earned by being the person who returned the call, by being the person who did the work, by being the person whose name, when said in a room, meant something specific. The way my father's name had meant something specific, in Linden in 2003. I want to stop here and tell you something honest. Because if I don't tell you this, the whole story is a lie. I was successful. I was respected. I had built, by any external measure, an extraordinary professional life, and I was also, in a way I did not let myself look at directly for many years, completely alone. I dated. I had friends. I had colleagues I liked, but I did not, in any deep sense, let anyone close. Because somewhere in the kitchen on that Tuesday in March when I was 19, I had quietly decided that love was a category of relationship that required surveillance. And surveillance is incompatible with intimacy. So I was very good at my work and very alone in my life, and I told myself this was discipline, and it was partly, and it was something else too, and I knew it. There was a moment in my late 20s when I almost did something I would have regretted. I want to tell you about it because it matters. I had spent months quietly on my own time building a dossier on Conrad's business, not illegally, just the things you can find if you know where to look. Public filings, county records, industry chatter, patterns in his vendor relationships. I knew, by the time I was 28, that Conrad's company was beginning to struggle. He had over-leveraged on a contract he shouldn't have taken. He had a key employee who was unhappy and would, within 18 months, leave and start a competing operation. He had financial habits that were going to catch up with him. I drafted an email one night to a journalist I'd met once who covered small business in our region. The email laid out, in calm and accurate language, exactly what Conrad had done to my parents in 2017, and exactly what he was now doing to his own company through similar bad habits. It was not slander. It was true. It was researched. It would have hurt him. I sat at my kitchen table with that email open on my screen for an hour, my finger over the trackpad. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that the cursor was on the send button. And I didn't send it. I want to tell you I didn't send it because I was wise. I wasn't. I didn't send it because I was tired. I was so tired. I was tired of being a person whose life was organized around a man who didn't think about me. I was tired of the version of myself that knew Conrad's quarterly numbers better than I knew the names of my neighbors. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. And I lay awake for a long time feeling, not strong, not righteous, but small. Because I had spent years preparing a weapon I had not been able to fire, and I didn't know what that made me. I almost want to laugh now, looking back. I thought that night that I had failed. I thought I had gone soft. I thought the discipline had broken. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that not sending that email was the single most important thing I did in those 15 years. Because what I needed to do wasn't to attack Conrad. What I needed to do was to keep becoming the person his life would eventually require him to call. I just didn't know that yet. The years between 28 and 34 are a blur in the way that good years are a blur. I built the practice. I bought a small house outside the city. Not Linden, I wasn't ready for Linden, but close enough that I could visit my mother every other weekend. My mother and I, in those years, became something we hadn't been when I was a child. We became friends. We sat at her kitchen table on Sunday afternoons and drank coffee and talked about nothing in particular, and sometimes about my father and sometimes about the business, but more and more about other things. She started writing in the green pencil ledger, again. Different entries now. Books she was reading, a bird she'd seen out the window, the name of a woman at the dental practice who had made her laugh. She never asked me about Conrad, not once in those years. I think she knew that if she asked, I would answer, and she didn't want the answer in the house with us. There was a Sunday, I want to say it was the spring, I was 32, when she did something I didn't expect. We were sitting on the back porch. She'd made iced tea. She said, "Silas, I want to give you something." And she went inside and came back with a paper grocery bag, folded over at the top. And inside the bag was my father's jacket. It was the jacket he had worn at the mill. Wool, dark green with leather patches on the elbows. It still smelled like him faintly, like sawdust and the particular soap he used. She said, "I've kept it for 14 years. I thought maybe, I don't know. I just thought it was time. I didn't put it on. I want you to understand that. I took the bag home. I hung the jacket in my closet, and I did not put it on. Not that year. Not the year after. Not the year after that. I would walk past it in the mornings, getting dressed for work, and I would look at it, and I would feel something I couldn't name, and I would close the closet door and go to work. I think now that I was waiting. I think I was waiting for something specific. I just didn't know what. I want to tell you about a phone call, not the one you're waiting for. A different one. Hollis Becker had been my parents' bookkeeper for 10 years. She was the only employee at Vance Lumber and Millwork who had refused to keep working for Conrad after he took the business. She was a small woman in her 70s by the time of this call, with white hair and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she had already finished thinking about something you were just beginning to think about. She called me out of nowhere on a Saturday afternoon. I was 33 years old. I hadn't spoken to her since my father's funeral. I was raking leaves in the yard. I picked up the phone and I heard her voice, and for a second I couldn't place it. She said, "Silas, it's Hollis." "Hollis Becker." I said, "Hollis. Hi, how are you?" She said, "Fine, listen. I'm calling because I have something I should have given you a long time ago. I would like to give it to you now. Can you come by the house?" I drove out to Linden the next morning. Hollis lived in a small ranch house on a street with no sidewalks. She made me coffee. She sat me down at her kitchen table, and she put in front of me a manila folder. She said, "Your father came to see me in February of 2017. A month before everything happened, he brought me this. He asked me to keep it. He said, 'Hollis, if something goes sideways, this is for Silas, not Adele. Adele has enough. Silas, when he's ready.'" I asked him what he was worried about. He said, "I'm probably worried about nothing." I knew he wasn't worried about nothing, but I didn't push. I should have pushed. I'm sorry. I opened the folder. Inside the folder were copies of documents, bank correspondence, vendor letters, 2 pages from my father's own handwriting in pencil on lined paper detailing concerns he had about Conrad, specific concerns, with dates, with names of people Conrad had been meeting with that my father didn't recognize. My father had known. He had known something was wrong months before the letter arrived in my mother's hand. He had not told my mother because he had not wanted to worry her if he was wrong. He had given the documents to Hollis because, and this is the part I sat with for a long time at her kitchen table, because he had thought, even then, even before he was sure, that I might one day need them. My father had believed in me before there was a reason to. I closed the folder. I looked at Hollis. I said, "Thank you." She said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "I don't know yet." She nodded once. She said, "Take your time." He did. I drove home with that folder on the passenger seat. I drove the 4 hours back to my house and I put the folder on the kitchen table and I sat across from it and I did not open it again for a week. I needed to think. What I want to tell you is the thing I realized that week, because it is the thing this whole story is about. I had spent 15 years believing that the point of patience was to wait for the right moment to strike. That was the framework I had built my life inside. Patience as a weapon. Patience as a long, slow drawing of the bow. And what I realized, sitting across from that folder, was that I had been wrong. Not wrong about the patience, wrong about the purpose. The purpose of the patience had never been to find the right moment to strike. The purpose of the patience had been to become the kind of person who didn't need to strike at all. I want to be careful here, because this could sound, in the wrong telling, like a soft pretty about forgiveness, and that is not what this is. I had not forgiven Conrad. I want to say that clearly. I had not in any meaningful sense forgiven him, and I am not sure I ever will, and I have made my peace with that uncertainty. What I had become, instead, was something more useful than a person who wanted revenge. I had become a person Conrad's life was going to require him to call, not because I had planned it, not exactly, but because the work I had done, the years and the focus and the dossier I had refused to use, had made me, by the time I was 34, exactly the kind of operations consultant a man in Conrad's specific kind of trouble would eventually need. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to be ready when the phone rang. I want to tell you about something I saw, around that same time, that I haven't told anyone. I was driving home from a client visit. I passed through Linden. I stopped at a gas station I'd been to 1,000 times as a kid. And as I was pumping gas, I looked across the parking lot and I saw Conrad. He was at the next pump over. He hadn't seen me. He was helping Lorraine, his wife, my aunt, into the passenger seat of a car. She was moving slowly. She had a brace on her wrist. He was being gentle with her, patient. He had one hand on her elbow and the other on the top of the doorframe so she didn't bump her head. He said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed, briefly. He smiled. I stood there at the pump and I looked at him and I waited for the feeling I had been carrying for 15 years. The feeling that, when I saw him again, would surge up through my chest and confirm that the whole project of my life had been worth it. It didn't come. What came instead was, I don't know how to describe this exactly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't sympathy. He looked old. He looked like a man helping his wife into a car. He looked small. Not in a satisfying way, in a regular way. The way everyone looks small if you catch them in the right kind of light. I finished pumping gas. I got in my car. I drove home. And somewhere on that drive, I understood that the version of me that had needed Conrad to be a monster, that 19-year-old in the kitchen, had been, very quietly, without my noticing, growing up into someone else. Someone who did not need Conrad to be anything in particular. And that was, in a way I cannot fully explain, the moment the revenge actually ended, months before the phone call, in a parking lot. With my hand on his gas pump, I didn't know that then. I want to be clear. I drove home and I went back to my life and I kept working, but something had moved. Some small internal thing had shifted, and the rest of what happened, what I'm about to tell you about, was possible because of that shift, even though I didn't realize it at the time. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was 34. I was sitting at my desk, walnut, my father's old style of desk. I'd had it made, and the light was coming through the window the way it only comes in October, slow and gold and forgiving. My phone buzzed. I looked down. The name on the screen was Conrad Vance. I'm going to tell you exactly what I felt in the next 5 seconds. Because I had imagined this moment for 15 years, and I want to be honest about how different the real version was from the imagined version. I felt calm. That was the main thing. Not triumph. Not rage, not even surprise. Calm. I think I had felt the calm coming for years, the way you feel weather coming. I looked at the phone for the length of 2 more buzzes. I picked it up. I said, "Hello." "He says this, it's your Uncle Conrad." I said, "I know." He paused. He said, I figured. Listen, I'll cut to it. I need a favor. It's a business thing. I've been told you're the person to talk to. I've been told that you're the best in the region for the kind of trouble I'm in. And I don't know if you'll take the call. I don't know if I'd take the call if I were you. But I'm asking." Silence. The silence sit for a second, not for drama. I genuinely did not know yet what I was going to say. I said, "Tell me what kind of trouble." He told me. It took about 15 minutes. He laid it out, businesslike, in a tone that I've recognized from my father's kitchen 17 years before. The same professional tone he had used on the phone that day, except now he was on the other end of it. He had over-leveraged, he had lost his key employee, he had a vendor situation that was, in his words, not good. He was 18 months from losing the company my parents had built. He needed someone who could come in and triage. He had called 3 other consultants. They had all quoted him numbers he couldn't pay. He had been given my name by someone in the industry who had no idea who I was to him. When he was done, he said, "I know what I'm asking. I know what I did. I'm not going to pretend I don't. I don't know who else to call." I sat in the chair at my walnut desk. I looked out the window. I thought about my mother and her green pencil ledger. I thought about the folder Hollis Becker had given me. I thought about my father in February of 2017, saying, "I'm probably worried about nothing," and meaning the opposite. I thought about the email I had not sent. I thought about Conrad in the gas station parking lot with his hand on Lorraine's elbow. I thought about my father's jacket hanging in my closet, untouched. For 15 years, I said, "Conrad, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to tell you why." I said, "I'm not going to take your case. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not going to take your case," I said. "I'm going to give you the names of 2 people who can. They're not me, but they're good. They'll quote you a fair number. They'll do honest work. You can use my name when you call them. They'll take the meeting because of that. What happens after the meeting is between you and them." I said, "I'm not doing this because I forgive you. I want you to hear that too. I haven't forgiven you. I don't know if I will. That's not on the table. I said, I'm doing this because 15 years ago, on a Tuesday in March, you said something to my father in our kitchen. You said, 'We're family.' That's the only contract that matters. And then you spent 8 months proving you didn't mean it. I have spent 15 years deciding what I think that sentence actually means. I've decided I'm going to mean it, even though you didn't. Not because of you, in spite of you. Because the person I want to be is the person who means it," I said. "That's the favor. That's the whole favor. You're not getting anything else from me. Not advice, not a meeting, not a relationship. Just 2 phone numbers and the use of my name for 1 call. And after that, we go back to not speaking for the rest of our lives. Do you understand? He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. He said, "Silas, I said don't. Don't say anything. Take the names. Hang up the phone." I gave him the 2 names. I said them slowly. I made him repeat them back. He did. His voice was small. He said, "Thank you." I said, "Goodbye, Uncle Conrad." I hung up the phone. I put it face down on the walnut desk. I sat in the chair for a long time. I want to tell you what I did next. Because this is the part of the story I have not told anyone, and it is the part that mattered. I stood up. I walked to my closet. I opened the door. I took my father's jacket off the hanger. Dark green wool, leather patches on the elbows. I held it for a second. It was heavier than I remembered, or I was lighter. I'm not sure which. I put it on. It fit, not perfectly. It was a little broad in the shoulders. My father had been a little broader than I am, but it fit. It fit the way a thing fits when you've waited 15 years to find out whether it would. I walked outside. The October light was exactly where it had been when the phone rang. I stood in my yard. I did not cry. I did not feel triumphant. I felt, for the first time in 15 years, like the story was over. Not won, not lost, over. I want to tell you a few things before I let you go, because I think they matter. I want to tell you that I called my mother that night. I did not tell her about the phone call. I am not going to tell her about the phone call. She does not need it in the house with her, and she has not asked and she will not ask, and that is its own kind of love. I told her about the jacket. I told her I had put it on. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would be glad." And then, because she is my mother, she said, "Did it fit?" And I said, "Disley." And she laughed, a small private laugh, and said, "He had bigger shoulders." He always thought it was the other way around. I want to tell you that 2 months after the phone call, I drove past a warehouse in Linden. I don't know why I did it. I just did. The Vance sign was still on the side of the building, in the same lettering my father had picked out in 1996. The lot was quiet. There was a man I didn't recognize loading a truck. I drove past slowly and then I kept driving. I have not gone back. I don't think I need to. I want to tell you that I keep the green pencil ledger now. My mother gave it to me on my 35th birthday. She said, "I've written what I wanted to write in it. The rest is yours if you want it." I write in it on Sunday nights, in pencil, because pencil means you can be wrong. I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'll stop. I used to think that revenge was a thing you did, an act, a moment, a confrontation. I used to think that the people who took revenge were strong, and the people who didn't were weak, and that the only question was whether you had the courage to do the thing when the time came. I don't think that anymore. I think anger is loud because it's afraid time won't do the work. I think patience is quiet because it knows it will. I think the deepest revenge isn't an act at all. It's a life. It's the slow accumulation of who you become when you decide that the worst thing someone did to you is not going to be the most important fact about your life. It's choosing every day for 15 years to spend your hours on something other than them. And then, when they finally call, and they will call, because life eventually circles as every story back to its beginning, being able to answer the phone as someone they cannot reach, not because you've armored yourself against them, because you've outgrown the version of yourself they would recognize. I would do it the exact same way. The silence, the patience, the years. The work, the folder I never used, the email I never sent, the jacket I waited 15 years to put on. I would all of it again, and I would do it without anger, the way I did it the first time, because I have learned, and I am still learning. I want to be honest about that. I have learned that the people who hurt us are usually waiting, somewhere inside themselves, for us to confirm that they have made us small, and the only revenge that actually matters is the one where you don't. My Uncle Conrad called me on a Thursday in late October. I was 34 years old. He asked me for a favor. I gave him one. It wasn't the one he wanted. It was the one I had spent 15 years becoming able to give. Have you ever taken the long route on a family situation, chosen patience over reaction, silence over confrontation, years over minutes? I genuinely want to know. Tell me what it looked like. Tell me what it cost you. Tell me whether it was worth it. I'm still figuring that out myself. And I think the comments under this video might be the most honest place on the internet tonight, if we let them be. I'm going to go now. I'm going to put on my father's jacket. I'm going to go outside. The October light is almost gone for the year, and I don't want to miss what's left of it. Thank you for staying with me.